Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. I'm your host, Robert Bortons, and today we've got a great show with special guest Dr. Brian Ray. He is charge of NHERI, which is a homeschool research institution, and we'll talk about his homeschooling as well as some of his research that he has going on, as well as working on the 15 tools of learning and wrapping up with some cryptocurrency. So let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, and welcome back to Refining Rhetoric with your host, Robert Bortons. Today, my guest is Dr. Brian Ray. Dr. Ray is a leader in homeschooling research and the president of the National Home Education Research Institute, or NHERI, an organization that specializes in conducting and collecting research about homeschooling. It also publishes the peer-reviewed academic journal, The Homeschool Researcher. Dr. Ray has written on a variety of articles and books based on his research. He's received his PhD in science education from Oregon State University and his Master of Science from Zoology from Ohio University, which is where my wife went. His wife, Betsy, and he have 8 children, all of whom are homeschooled, and they have 17 grandchildren. Wow, Dr. Ray, you are rich. But Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Robert. This is wonderful. Glad to be here. Glad you let me on. This could be dangerous, but you let me on. So here we go.
Well, we'll edit out anything controversial. Say just kidding.
All right.
So, what is the National Home Education Research Institute for maybe our listeners who've never heard of it before?
I've been trying to explain this to people for 32 years, Robert. So let's see if I can do something that people will understand. We are essentially a research think tank, and we gather data, we analyze data, and we publish and distribute information, factual research information about homeschooling, parent-directed home-based education. We gather and look at and evaluate other people's research, and we serve as a clearinghouse of research, statistics, and facts on homeschooling. And we are doing that for the general public, for scholars, for educators, and anybody, including homeschool parents or parents in general, who are interested in homeschooling. That's what we do. That is what we do. That's what we've been doing for 32 years. And 5 years before that with the journal Homeschool Researcher.
Awesome. Now, like, who's paying for this research? And not meaning like for you to give away donor information, but is it like through grants, or you've got like a rich benefactor, or who's interested in this stuff?
I'm so glad you asked. I mean, I love how you're not afraid to ask about basic stuff like money, Robert. So who keeps this going? People listening to this podcast, moms and dads who homeschool, people who believe in educational freedom, people who believe in parental rights to raise their children how they see fit. So basically, individuals who believe in what's going on and what NHERI is doing, but also organizations like homeschool organizations. For example, the statewide organizations like, say, NCHE of North Carolina, CHEA of California, THSC of Texas, Ocean of Oregon. These leaders of homeschool organizations are some of the people who understand the most and the most deeply about the value of research, and we'll get into why later. But these organizations will donate from the organization, and then a few, and I'm just going to go ahead and say Classical Conversations, a few businesses and or services who help homeschoolers give to NHERI, because they also understand the history of home education. They understand the importance, absolute importance of empirical evidence. We'll talk about that. But most of it is individual donors, homeschool organizations, and people believe in parental rights. NHERI is not getting government tax dollars. NHERI is not getting tax-funded grants. Now, way long ago, I was involved in one government-funded grant, but it's been a long time since that. So it is not the taxpayers. It's not the taxpayers like the ones who are funding university professors at universities, which are, by and large, I'm not going to be too hyperbolic here, by and large, very left, Marxist, neo-Marxist, CRT, LGBTQIA. We're not getting that money. So we really do depend on individuals, organizations, and businesses who understand the value of homeschooling. That's what we depend on. In the recent past, we did get a grant from a nonprofit that's interested in school choice. So that was really cool. Okay, that's it.
No, I appreciate that. I just want people to know that their donations to you is super helpful, especially if you value homeschooling freedom. So just explain to our listeners, why is researching homeschoolers like so important, and what is this research used for?
Okay. All right. So keep me on track here, Robert. one of the best ways I can explain this is that a long time ago, probably before some homeschool parents who are listening to this were maybe even born, uh, Mike Ferris, who was one of the founders of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, HSLDA, and now, as far as I understand it, what's he called? CEO of Alliance Defending Freedom.
Yep, and he was on a special episode with us already, so you can go check that out if
Oh,
you're a listener.
wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. Mike is great. He's forever and ever and ever, I don't know how long, maybe when he was a teenager, he is a forward thinker. And Mike is brilliant, and Mike is creative. But a long time ago, around, I'm just going to guess, around 1989, he said that what we need in the parent-led education movement, and by at that point, it was quite a young movement, right?
Yes.
I mean, it was a norm for thousands of years, but then it went extinct almost, and then it came back. But we can get into that later. Anyway, Mike Ferris said, well, we need two things. We need parents to go in person with their children and talk with their state legislators and let legislators see who these people are. Let them find out that they're not walking around with kind of like weird insect antennae and oddball, but let them see your children, let them find out that they're real people, and maybe their children are respectful, interesting, and so forth and so on, and interested. And he said, number two, we need research. We need sound research. We need facts, figures, and statistics about the truth to give to legislators, the media, journalists, courts, anybody who will listen. We need factual information. And literally, I don't have the perfect history here, but if I got out a booklet, I don't have it with me. 1990 was the first big nationwide study that NHERI and I got to do. So what is that, 32 years ago? How's my math?
That's good.
Is that about right?
That is about
That's hard to believe, Robert. Robert, think about that. 32 years ago, we did the first nationwide study, got into academic achievement of children homeschooled, parent demographics, why they homeschool, all that kind of stuff. And I'll have to say, HSLDA was the major funder of that. Thank you, HSLDA. And that study got all over the news. It got into journals. It got into books. It got everywhere. And by God's sovereign design, I got to do that. It was really fun, very exciting. So, that's just one example. And really, here's the deal. Several years after that, I don't remember the date right now, but Kay Coles James, who was, I think, was she a big administration, one of the states, she said, she came and spoke to us homeschool leaders and said, he who has the data controls the policy. Now, that might sound weird, but, you have to face the reality of politics and face the reality of journalism and face the reality. We all say that, hey, everybody's just driven by emotion and, they don't listen to facts and figures. They won't listen to reason. But you know what? Some people actually do listen to facts and figures and reason. So we have to remember that people are made in God's design, and by God's design, they do have logic. They can think rationally. I'm not saying we always do. I'm not saying everybody always does, but facts and figures and truth that are supportable with premises and evidence are effective, very effective, Robert. So, when somebody says, oh, well, homeschool kids are not well socialized, and there's no way that a non-government certified teacher parent could teach a child that the letter A has three sounds, a, ah. We have empirical evidence that, yes, in fact, these children can interact with other children. They can interact with adults. And yes, a mom or a dad who is just a high school dropout can teach a child that the letter A has three sounds, a, ah, without a college degree and without government teacher certification. So, I don't want to dumb down the whole situation, but facts are tremendous when you're talking with journalists and people who don't like parental rights and parental freedom.
Yeah, and it wasn't until 1993, 3 years after that study came out, that homeschooling was actually officially recognized as legal in all 50 states. So what have you really seen since that time? Like, how has homeschooling changed, especially from your research?
Yeah, some things have not changed hardly at all, but a lot of things have changed. So, back in the day, it's kind of fun to think about stereotypes. Like, back then, people thought that homeschoolers were either left-wing, Birkenstock wearers, goat herders, move to the country and blow up TVs with ponytails, or they were right-wing, white, fundamentalist Christian Bible thumpers, So, stereotypes, Robert, usually have a grain of truth to them, but hey, they're just kind of wipe out all of the variety in a group. So yeah, there were some of those. And really at the beginning, some people would argue that actually the pedagogues are the people more concerned about school as jail and freeing the children. They might have been the first, but it was really happening simultaneously under God's sovereign work, that both pedagogues who were thinking about, we need more options and variability and choices in pedagogical approaches, and people who were thinking more philosophically and religiously, and God is directing me to teach our children. They were both happening. back in the late 70s. But as time went on and homeschooling became more popular and the adult peer pressure against it lessened a little, because we all talk about peer pressure of children and teenagers, adults are just as guilty. They want to go along with society. But as that peer pressure diminished a little bit because of numbers, not only did we have the same variety, but we had more of the variety. So yes, homeschooling was relatively light skin colored at first, but by 10, 15 years ago, we started seeing darker skin colors. Whereas at the beginning, homeschooling was probably 70 to 80% self-professing, strong Christians, Bible believers. You know what? That's not as high a percent anymore. We have not just the variety of atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Mormons, but we have more of all of them, all right? Not only did we have people talking about unschooling 30 years ago, but we have more people talking about unschooling. Not only did we have people talking about formalized, very structured education at the beginning, but we have more of that. We just have more of all these varieties. So I think that's the main story. Some of the people who were very, I don't want to say afraid. It was very hard for them because of peer pressure, certain groups to homeschool 20 years ago. Now it's much more open, Robert,
Right.
much more open. People are much more open to the idea.
So why did you and Betsy decide to homeschool your children? Because you guys are some of the pioneers. And then what are some of the most common reasons you see parents today choosing homeschooling?
Okay, Robert, if it's okay with you, I'll answer the first question last. So why do people homeschool? That's something we have been studying for over 30 years. And I think one thing that's fascinating about that, what we find in the research, and I've been doing those studies, other people have done those studies, is that many of them have not changed. Like you just go to our fact sheet at NHERI.org and then research in the fact sheet. And it's incredible how this has not changed over all these years, hardly at all. So why do people homeschool? They want to customize or individualize a curriculum and learning environment for each child. They want to be able to do more academically than can get done in schools. They want to use different pedagogical approaches rather than just what's typical in institutional school. Parents tell us all the time they want to be able to guide the social interaction of their children, not control it all the time, not control it till the Billy and Susie are 25 years old, but they want to guide it rather than just let their children go with 28, children plus or minus 11 months, let it rip for 12 years and see how it turns out at the end. They want a safer environment for their children. They want alternative educational approaches, and they want to be able to impart a particular set of values, beliefs, and worldview to their children. Now, in the last 5 or 10 years, we've also been seeing more people talk about, especially people who come from a Black or African American cultural or whatever background you want to call. They're saying, hey, you know what? We do think there are some issues in the public schools where Black children are not treated as well, especially for boys. So we've been seeing that come out in the research. And then, of course, in the last couple of years, all the government lockdowns and people finding out things about public schools that they never knew, finding out that their lives are too much controlled by public schools, just all kinds of things. So, a lot of that hasn't changed over the years. I call them fundamental issues that have been around and talked about in the modern homeschool movement for over 30 years. And they're very stable. And I think that's one reason why homeschooling keeps growing, is that these reasons are deep and they're stable. Now, what about my wife and me? Well, I don't usually talk about that a lot in public forums, but I will today, Robert, a little bit. Okay, so, we do speak often at homeschool conferences. And people know me as Dr. Ray. Dr. Ray, the researcher. Okay, well, I'm Brian. I'm also Brian, the dad, Brian the grandpa, Brian the hunter, Brian the gardener, Brian the little shepherd of a flock of sheep. And for us, from the very, very get-go, Robert, even though I study homeschoolers and I do a lot of research on academic achievement, test scores, and all that, on and on and on and on and on and on. The main reason, two reasons. We believe it is the biblical, normative duty, job, responsibility, command of parents to be the main educators of their children, not strangers, not people with another worldview. And we like to be with our children. So, it's pretty simple. We are Christians. We believe that Jesus is God. He's the one and only Savior, that the word that he gave us is true and accurate and perfect and wonderful. And we want to teach the gospel to, and we wanted to show the gospel in action to our children, and expose them to that, and enjoy them, spend time with them, laugh with them, cry with them, fight with them, argue with them, go outside with them, go places together, let other people be involved in their lives, other teachers, other adults, other children. But we did not want to hand them over to strangers, government certified agents, or otherwise, to be the main adults who teach, train, and indoctrinate our children. That was not the way we thought it should be done. So that's what we did. All forms of schooling, whether it's private schooling, government-run public institutional schooling or homeschooling, all of them, and I'll say this at research conferences with professionals and professors, all of them are a form of teaching, training, and indoctrination. And from a biblical perspective, if you're a Christian, you got to look at that scripturally. You have to ask yourself, does God want you to hand over your children to be taught, trained, and indoctrinated by somebody else, in particular, people who are not known by and do not know Christ?
Yeah, I know with the Old Testament with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, that seemed to be a pretty big deal to God's people when they took the young ones to be educated to be Babylonians.
Yeah. So we have, Betsy and I have philosophical / religious reasons. When I say philosophical, some people get nervous, but that has to do with our metaphysics, epistemology, and axiology, what we believe to be real and true and of value and how we know anything. And look, we're Christians. If every Christian has to be a biblicist and a scripturalist. So, that was it. And then, as we were raising our children, we started looking at it thinking, what in the world? We want to go put them in some building for 6 hours per day and not get to enjoy life with them? No way. No way, having fun with them and doing things with other families during the day and going on trips and just doing things together. That's a much better way to live, rather than our lives being dictated by an institution called school, education, quote, education, which, is all of life. So why do we separate it out, math from whatever?
Right.
To be integrated with our family life. So we just became, I don't know. It's interesting. Before our first child was born, so this would have been 1980, I was student teaching. This is after my master's in zoology. I was student teaching in a public high school in Portland, Oregon. And Betsy was a student teaching in a grade school, public grade school in Portland, Oregon. And she came home one day. Like I said, we were pregnant with the first child. She said, Robert, we had never heard of homeschooling. She said, I don't know what we're gonna do, but we're never going to put them in a school like that.
That's funny. My wife said the same thing. She didn't know about homeschooling until she had met me. And when we were dating or courting, I said, I'm going to homeschool my kids. I enjoyed it. If that's something that you're not interested in, we probably should end this kind of like where we are. And she started laughing. She said, I would never send my kids to these schools, because she was a public school teacher for 9 years, I think.
Wow.
And so same experience, but a couple decades later.
Yeah. And it was not that. Okay, so when you go back to then, whenever that was, that was 42 years ago.
You don't want to think about that.
Yeah, yeah. So you look at that, and compared to today, people say, oh, the schools are so much nicer then. They were safer then. They were this, they were that. But there was still something about it. It was strangers. It was people who don't know God. It was a system that is not given, that the scripture does not specify or even give permission. In fact, I would argue from a biblical perspective, there's no authority of the government to be teaching, training, and indoctrinating children. So if you start to look at it that way, and I love to challenge Christian brothers and sisters, just start with Genesis 1:1 and go through the entire Bible and ask yourself, to whom did God give the duty to be the main educators of children? Not only that, Robert, but the second question, and to whom did he not give it?
Yeah.
And the second question is where a lot of Christians get hung up. They go, whoa, that's not a fair question. See, not only did he not give it to the civil government, but the teaching, training, indoctrination is never in the scripture given under the jurisdiction of the civil government. So it's not the role of the civil government.
Yeah, the Bible is pretty clear in my mind what the role of the government is. And when the government sticks to that role, we'll have freedom and flourishing and strong and healthy families and strong and healthy communities. And when they take over the role of the family, when they take over the role of the church, whether we abdicate it or they take it by force, you see the world and the sin and just it's bad for everybody.
I think you're right. And I want the audience to notice Robert did not say perfect families. Robert did not say homeschooling saves your children. But when we do things God's ways, things are better, a lot better.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if we want to learn about the academic performance of homeschooling students versus traditional students, just go to the website. There's a lot of great research there. I want to talk about current trends of homeschooling within the last few years. We touched on that a little bit earlier. Was there anything surprising that you've seen?
I would say that, of course, all of us were surprised by the big old government lockdowns 2 years ago. So none of us knew that was coming. Well, I don't think hardly anybody did. Who knows? We could get into all kinds of theories, but we won't do that today, Robert. I mean, that was under God's sovereign hand, no matter what, whether there was bad intent or good intent, it was under God's sovereign hand. So that was incredible. And I've been saying for many years that whatever happens, when I see more parents taking on the responsibility of educating their children, I'm happy about that. Whether whether they're Christians or atheists or agnostics or Mormons or Jews. I'm glad about that. It's good overall for society, and it's good overall for children. We could get into all the why children do well academically and socially in homeschooling. If we had time, maybe another day, we could get into that. So that was a big one. I was happy. The numbers who are homeschooled in America went up really fast. There's some debate with my friends about how much it went up. I think it went up less than some of my friends think, but it did go up significantly.
I'm glad I'm on your side, Dr. Ray, because I can't do the math to get to where a lot of people have gotten to.
Yeah. They're my good friends, and that's okay. But I disagree with them, and I think I'm right. So, and I think we're not going to know maybe for another year or two exactly what happened, but I'm pretty sure after the big spike fall of or 2 falls ago, I'm pretty sure that the number went down some this last fall. We don't know how much, and that's fine. But the trend is still upward in terms of percent homeschooled and numbers homeschooled. Now, what I think, Robert, is that as exciting as that is and as positive as that is, there are still limiting factors in our society. And some of the limiting factors are, and I'll just be really blunt here, not all parents want to spend that kind of time with their children. Not all parents are willing to give or sacrifice enough to live on less money. So they want 2 incomes. And another one is that it's very difficult, challenging, but not impossible to homeschool when you're a single parent. So there are a lot of limiting factors. It's also a little bit hard, although I don't think it's a good excuse. Of course, we all pay twice. We pay our property taxes to pay for government-run schools, and then we need to pay again for homeschool curriculum activities. So those are limiting factors. So I think it's going to continue growing, if not rapidly, slowly, because more people are seeing the value of home education. More people are seeing the negatives of institutional schooling, especially government schooling. Dennis Prager recommended, I think it was about a year ago, get your children out of all schools, including private schools, because so many of them have become very woke, left, Marxist, CRT, whatever. So that's a factor. So I think it's going to keep growing, but also we have the factor that the more people who are homeschooled, the more likely they will homeschool their children. So that's a growth factor. I'm a biologist, so I think of limiting factors and growth factors. I think it's going to keep growing for a while. Yeah, the trends I'd say are continued growth for now, even if it's not ecstatic growth. I think another thing we're going to see is that there are, Robert, people out there who just hate freedom in a sense, and there are people who would say they love freedom, but they do not want parents to have the freedom to choose how to raise their children. Of course, they're going to word it differently. They're going to say, well, they're in England they call it safeguarding children. Here they say, well, the state has to be in charge of the children and protect them. So I'm going to read something to you. This is in a book, Homeschooling, the History and Philosophy of a Controversial Practice by James Dwyer and Sean Peters. Dwyer is the philosopher. I just want to quote him, and I want to give him credit, first of all, for being honest. Not many professors I hang out with on that side of the philosophical spectrum are honest, but he's honest, okay? He says in here on page 156, one of his assumptions or presuppositions is this. Listen to this one. Number 4 out of 6. The state must have the ultimate authority to determine what children's interests are, period. Okay, so he is admitting he's a flat-out statist. He does not believe in what you and I believe from the scriptures, from God, and he believes, therefore, the state is sort of like gives Robert temporary permission to make decisions for your children. I'm not making this up, okay? Like the government gives you that opportunity, but they can take it back whenever they want to. This is a book that was published just, I don't know, a couple years ago. This is not an old book. But then, of course, a lot of people know about Professor Elizabeth Bartolet. She wants to ban homeschooling, and then Robert and his wife would have to prove to the government why they should be allowed to homeschool their children. So some of us thought maybe that was going away, but these people with this deep philosophical root are still around. They're constantly pushing that. So I think we're going to see efforts, especially as homeschooling grows in numbers. They don't like it, and they're going to try things to try to control, regulate. Some of them even want to ban home education. So we got to be on our toes. We need more good research, more facts, more figures. We need strong philosophical arguments. So I think we're going to see an increase in that.
What is your vision for the future of homeschooling in the United States and globally? Are you optimistic about where we're going? I mean, it sounds like we got some battles that we're still going to have to fight. I mean, you said it's going to grow a little bit more, but do you think the future is bright, or we're going to get some more road bumps?
Overall, I think it is bright because of these things that, like I said, parents, regardless of their worldviews or philosophies, they don't have to be the same as mine. They overall care a lot about their children. And I am very thankful that under the sovereignty of God, more parents are waking up a lot to what goes on in institutional schools and how they need to be intimately involved in their children's lives. So I'm very optimistic about this. I see that in America. I see it in places as far-flung as South Korea, Russia, England. I mean, we just see that all over the place. You and I have been some of the same places. And so I'm very happy about that, very excited about that. And I think that if groups like Classical Conversations and NHERI and state organizations keep on their mission and remembering that a lot of our job is to educate, Robert. I mean, parents are educating their children. Homeschool organizations and leaders and those kinds of people, we help educate parents and encourage them and exhort them and support them. And I think that's extremely important, extremely important. I'm so very thankful for what CC does and some of these organizations do. So I think all of those organizations, from the support groups to the state organizations to groups like CC and HSL, they are extremely important. I'm very happy about that. I see a lot of those state organizations getting stronger. I'm very optimistic about that. Yeah, some road bumps, like I said, statists. I'm not defaming them. They are statists. They believe the state, rather than God, has this authority. And so we have to watch that and be on our toes for that. I think we also have to be on our toes for things that look good on the surface. Like I'm pretty concerned about the government-funded school at home programs, government-funded school choice with a capital S, capital C. I know a lot of people have good intentions with that, but I think it very much undermines the concept of parents and the biblical sphere of jurisdiction of the family, because it allows the state to take the money and then dole it back out, to be blunt. I am concerned about that. I think parents need to be aware of that. And that comes under the guise of government charter public school at home. It comes in the form of what they call tax credits, something, I forget what it's called, ESAs. I think parents need to realize that's government money, and whether it's a little bit or a lot, it will always have government control. So I think we need to watch out for that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we like to say, with the shekels come the shackles.
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
What research are you working on now?
Oh boy. So you know about one thing, and it takes I think sometimes people don't understand that a research project can take a long time. So how to summarize this? I would say at least close to 10 years ago, I started thinking about and talking with homeschool leaders about doing a study of comparing homeschool children, public school children, private school children. And it's a tough topic, how much abuse and neglect they do or do not experience. And anybody who's been around the block knows that over the last several years, every now and then, a story comes up in the newspaper where parents who were allegedly or actually homeschooling their children, allegedly or actually, do evil things to their children. Okay, so the media and certain people of certain philosophies blow that way out of proportion. I think, that's my opinion, blow it way out of proportion, and then say, see, look, homeschool kids are more susceptible to abuse and neglect. And however, they don't have any empirical evidence to support that claim. So enter researchers. I'm very excited that we were able to pull together a study, get some funding from groups like individuals and organizations and CC and others. And my colleague and I, Dr. Denise Shaquille, got to do the study. We got the data. And I cannot say the exact thing yet, Robert, but maybe we'll come back on the show. I keep telling you this, but it's with a journal, a peer-reviewed journal, and we think we're really, 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 really close to going public.
That's awesome. And is your fellow researcher right-wing nut like you?
my friend Danny
Just teasing.
Is the best I know of a different religious worldview. I really enjoy him, and we have a blast working together. So
this isn't, my point being, this isn't a bias to like Dr. Ray's try to impose your worldview on this subject at all.
No, this is wonderful. Under God's sovereign hand, he's at a university, a prestigious place. He's an excellent researcher, brilliant. I call him a young man because he's way younger than I am, and it's been a blast with him. So no, it's going to be very factual and statistical and analytical, and I think people are going to be very engaged by it. So that's coming out real soon, the Lord willing. I'm working on another multi-state study with several homeschool organizations and a curriculum supplier and a company that does testing students, homeschool students. I don't know how much to say about that, but we're working on that to see if we can start developing a better way to, maybe on an annual basis, be able to put out some reports rather than wait 10 years for the next big study. So that's exciting. And then back to my buddy and colleague, Dr. Shaquille, we are also talking about, I don't think he'd mind me saying this, think about this one. What if we were to do a study, Robert, to get into some things like this, comparing graduates of home education to graduates of public government schooling or private institutional schooling on things like their civic involvement, their political tolerance, using a proper definition, how well they know and understand history about their own country, about all kinds of things. How about their views on free speech, whether it should be nurtured in our country or controlled? What are their views of sexuality and family life. Danny and I are just having a blast thinking about this and talking about how to get people involved and behind it and fund it. And it could be a huge study that no one's ever done before. And he's really avidly interested in doing it with me. So we're working on that.
That's awesome. I would love to help you all out with that, and I'll answer your survey. I'm a homeschool graduate.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do that though. You'll have to pick somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Brian, for your insight. I'd love to have you on again because there's like 3 or 4 topics I think we could do another show on easily. And I know people are excited to hear about this research, and I know it's going to be super beneficial as we continue to keep homeschooling free, not just here in the United States, but fight for homeschooling freedom around the world. So if people want to learn more about you or NHERI, remind them what that website is and any social media platforms you're on.
Very easy. I'll try to enunciate clearly. NHERI.org. Just go there, sign up. Free research news. We do not send out a bunch of junk email. I have no time for that. Free homeschool research news. Go to the website, up at the top right, click connected. 17 seconds. Free homeschool research news.
Yeah, I use it all the time. If you have family or friends who are questioning your homeschooling or want statistics, I appreciate all the information there. So NHERI.org. And Brian, thanks again for coming on.
You're welcome, and thank you, Robert.
I always enjoy speaking with Dr. Ray, and he's just so wise, and I appreciate all the positive work he has done for homeschooling. And he does his best to remove his personal biases from his studies. And I know that it's been greatly beneficial to the homeschooling community at large. He's one of those giants that's behind the scenes that you may not have heard about. So I definitely recommend everyone check out NHERI.org. But let's practice these 15 tools of learning. And we're going to start with the 5 core habits of grammar and storytelling. Dr. Ray explained to us how his research has helped homeschoolers around the United States and even the world tell good stories and convince legislators and administrators that homeschooling is in fact a good thing and something that they should support and not get in the parents' way. With testimony, which is one of the 5 common topics of dialectic, discovering what others say, I asked him about his optimism of the future of homeschooling, and he said he is optimistic and gave us a number of reasons why. And that's so encouraging when someone who's deep down in the weeds and in the numbers is able to tell us what we hope to hear, and that is homeschooling is strong and is growing, and that you as parents are doing a great job. And then we know that Dr. Ray uses invention, which is one of the 5 canons of rhetoric, as he prepares his research studies. He's trying to ask good questions that will give the results that he is looking for. Not that he's looking for a particular, we want it this way or that way, but making sure that the results are accurately reflecting the results that we see in homeschooling and whatever he is researching. So invention is a key part of doing good research, and we know that Dr. Brian Ray does that. Now let's practice these 15 tools of learning with a current event. All right, we are going to be using these 15 tools of learning to look at the student loan forgiveness. I think it's important for us to have an informed view of what is student loan forgiveness so that we can really make a decision. Is this something that's biblical? Is this something that we should be cheering on? Or is this something that will continue us down the road to serfdom? And so we're going to be looking at this from 2 parts. And part 1 will just be a more classical perspective with the facts and what we're seeing from different sides, as well as part 2, where we'll look at this from a biblical worldview. So let's talk about tending, which is part of the 5 core habits of grammar. And that's where you differentiate the words from other known ideas. And so I think it's really important. One side is framing this as student loan forgiveness. And the question that I would have as a parent, can you forgive the sins of one of your child against the other one? So if one of your children, say, says something mean to your other child, do you have the power to forgive that child? Or does the other child need to be able to forgive them? And I think we all know that we don't have the power to forgive people of debts that they do not owe us. And so really that idea of forgiveness is not accurate. I think it is more of a transfer. So we're transferring that debt from a student to the national deficit. So I think it's very important that we understand what's going on here. We're $30 trillion in debt, and it's going to be somewhere between $300 billion and $1 trillion more into that national debt. And I just want to say, I think from a conservative perspective, we talk about a slippery slope. And really, for the progressive, that slippery slope is inverted, and it's the long upward march of progress. And when I was in college, student loans were different than they are today. They were privately held, and the federal government under President Obama took over that responsibility. And one of my friends who was a progressive said that it was good because the federal government was on the hook for bad loans anyways, and the federal government could actually make money on the interest being paid, and it would be able to be used for good things. Now, some stories recently have said that this has not actually happened. The federal government did say that they should make money on these federal loans, and they've actually been losing them. And with the student loan forgiveness, as they call it, it's actually going to be significantly more losses at this time. In the 5 common topics of dialectic, we talk about testimony. One of my favorite economists is Thomas Sowell, and he says, you can't subsidize irresponsibility and expect people to become more responsible. The student loan forgiveness is a one-time event, but the changes haven't occurred to make this not needed in the future. So if you're entering college, would you be more inclined to take on additional student debt, knowing the likelihood of it being forgiven in the future, versus maybe not going on spring break and working a job and maybe picking a responsible way of paying it versus putting that burden on someone else? And I think all of us would see that it would make more sense to take out more student loans if you expect it to be forgiven in the future versus doing the responsible thing and paying for college yourself. And in the 5 canons of rhetoric, invention, which is asking the questions through the 5 common topics, which we just discussed one of those. But these are questions that I would ask. Definition. And the first thing I said, does the POTUS, the President of the United States, really have the authority to transfer student loans from the individual to the taxpayer? Next, I would do comparison. So I would compare, what was our student loan debt prior to the federal government taking it over versus now. And in relationship, I would say, is it Congress's responsibility? Do they hold the purse strings? Or is it the president's responsibility to hold the purse strings? And in circumstances, I would talk about, what would potentially happen if these student loans are forgiven versus not forgiven. And testimony, Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that the President of the United States does not have the authority to forgive student loans just earlier this year. Now, in all likelihood, this is going to go to the Supreme Court, and it could be overruled as unconstitutional and not within the scope of the presidential powers. So that would then cause people who thought that their loan was forgiven to be very mad, and obviously would be very disruptive into their lives, as well as considerable cost to the federal government, who has defended this unconstitutional mandate executive order, as well as whatever they've done logistically to make this happen. So in part 2, we'll look at this from a biblical worldview, but those are some of the facts and reasons why you should be concerned about student loan forgiveness. Before getting on with the show, I want to tell you about the Museum of the Bible. If you haven't been, you have to go. It's an absolute must for your next family's vacation to our nation's capital. With a very large museum in Washington, D.C., and traveling exhibits from around the world, Museum of the Bible brings visitors through an interactive, immersive experience using cutting-edge technology to tell the impact, narrative, and history of the scriptures. And you'll find a lot of the Classical Conversations program in a lot of their information that you can learn there. Also, great news for CC families. You can save on tickets. Just log into CC Connected to find your Museum of the Bible discount code to apply during checkout. So visit museumofthebible.org to get more information. Now back to the show.
Welcome to this episode of Classical Crypto with Will, where we discuss digital finance, traditional finance, and how they tie into current events. As you may well know, The Chinese economy is not in a good place right now. We've already discussed the woes the US is facing. Our current markets have already collapsed, and we're already battling a recession. But to me, China's current situation is a little more sinister. First, let's touch on the banking system. The Chinese central banking system is primarily run by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. For years, other global leaders have pointed out China's 4 largest banks, and they said, hey, look, they're a ticking time bomb, because it appears that the CCP and government programs in China are able to walk away from these huge banks with large loans and sometimes not repay them, whereas the average citizen or the private sector of China can borrow money, but at extremely high rates. Again, the situation favors the CCP. That is a banking problem. So you may be thinking, every time I see China in the news, they're talking about a Chinese real estate collapse. Well, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, the average citizen in China doesn't trust their own banking system, and it appears that they throw the majority of their money into real estate, which has exploded in recent years and has grown at a tremendous rate, but is now on the brink of utter and complete collapse. If you want to go deep on the details of China's economy, I suggest that you look up Real Vision by Raoul Powell. Subscribe there. You can go deep with it. But here's what I'll leave you with. Look into Evergrande. Evergrande is a Chinese real estate giant. They are currently in dire trouble, though, with over $300 billion in financial liabilities. $300 billion is a huge number, one that I very much doubt the CCP is going to bail them out of. Next, I want to read a quote from TheGuardian.com from last week. They stated, experts believe that China has reached a point of no return in its battle to contain what could be the biggest property crash the world has ever seen, creating a perilous moment for the country's communist leadership and the global economy. And then how does this relate to crypto? Well, I'll give you a couple bullet points. As this real estate collapse is ensuing, a couple years ago, China completely banned Bitcoin mining. And for one simple fact, a centralized economy, or the centralized CCP, will never conform to a financial system they can't control. It's a free system. They don't like that. So that's the first thing. They don't want it. They've banned crypto. They're banning Bitcoin and DeFi, or decentralized finance as a whole. Second, China is experimenting with the digital yuan. This is a centralized cryptocurrency run on a blockchain controlled by the CCP. It ties directly into a social credit system. This is very scary, and this is a traceable CBDC. A couple episodes ago, I went deep on CBDCs, it's central bank digital currencies. I would suggest going back and listening to that one. The digital yuan represents the exact opposite of what the entire philosophy of Bitcoin and decentralized finance is built on. In my opinion, we need to watch the situation closely. If China is struggling with debt and we're in debt to China, that's not a great situation to be in. Side note, this is yet another example of why communism doesn't work. Stay safe, stay informed, and you'll be hearing from me soon.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you had a lot of fun and learned a lot from Dr. Brian Ray, as well as practicing these 15 tools of learning so that we can use them throughout our lives. So be sure to check out our next episode, and if you enjoyed this one, share it with a friend.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.